Picture this. Okay. It is 1998. You are in this packed, incredibly sweaty underground club in London.
Oh, yeah, the perfect setting.
Right. The bass is just thumping, the crowd is moving in this perfect unison, and the DJ drops a track that sends the entire room into absolute overdrive.
I mean, it's warm, it's intricate, it has this unbelievably catchy groove to it.
Exactly. But here's a really wild part. Virtually nobody in that room knows that they are dancing to a Portuguese song about a Brazilian rationalist cult recorded in, 1975.
It is honestly the ultimate musical sleight of hand. I mean, you have an audience thousands of miles away, decades in the future, just completely under the spell of this highly localized sound.
And a sound that was forged under incredibly intense, specific historical pressures.
Oh, totally. Very specific pressures.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are unpacking how a musical movement born under a brutal military dictatorship became the absolute holy grail for global record collectors.
And, how it quietly infiltrated the modern digital streaming landscape.
Yeah, because even if you have never set foot in a record shop in São Paulo, I guarantee the DNA of the music we are about to discuss is hiding right there in the playlists you listen to every single day.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Once you understand the mechanics of this sound, you really do start hearing its influence everywhere. I mean, it is a brilliant story of a localized culture finding this universal language.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our guide for this journey is an incredibly detailed, retrospective column from Monumental Movement Records.
Yeah, the MMR column. It's fantastic.
It really is. They've done this masterful job tracing the origins, the architects, and the global revival of what they call Brazilian boogie and MPB rare groove.
Right. And what I appreciate is that they don't just list the tracks. They actually explain the environment that necessitated them.
Which is crucial. Because you really cannot understand this music without understanding 1970s Brazil.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 1970s in Brazil was a deeply paradoxical era. I mean, you have a country operating under a heavy military regime. There is severe political suppression, strict censorship, and just a general atmosphere of tension.
Like a very stifling environment.
Very. Yet, right in the middle of all that,
Yeah.
the musical culture is experiencing this explosion of vibrant, diverse, almost aggressive expression.
Right, and the column talks about how the dominant musical form at the time was MPB, right? Música Popular Brasileira.
Yes, exactly.
Now, my understanding is that historically, MPB was deeply rooted in acoustic traditions. You had samba, you had the cool kind of whispery tones of bossa nova.
Very organic, very folksy.
Yeah, but in the 70s, it completely mutates, doesn't it? It starts absorbing all these massive international currents, specifically American soul, funk, and disco.
It did, and out of that massive MPB umbrella, you get this specific, highly kinetic subset that the source refers to as Brazilian boogie.
Brazilian boogie. I love that term.
It's great. It took those traditional acoustic melodic sensibilities of MPB and basically strapped them to a rocket of heavy, urban, dance-oriented grooves.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was music entirely designed to make you move physically.
But help me reconcile that timeline, because this is where I get a bit stuck.
Sure.
You have intense political censorship. Artists are being monitored. Some are even being exiled, right?
Right. It was a very dark period.
And the musical response to that dark, oppressive reality is like a sophisticated, joyful disco funk movement.
I know. It sounds wild.
It feels counterintuitive. And is it possible that this wasn't just mindless escapism, like a musical pressure cooker, so to speak?
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like if you can't write a direct protest song without getting arrested, do you just build this impenetrable fortress of groove on the dance floor? Is it possible that the joy itself becomes the rebellion?
That is a brilliant way to frame it, and honestly, the source material heavily supports that interpretation.
Really?
Yeah. When you look at the lyrical themes of Brazilian boogie, they pivot sharply toward urban life, romance, and the everyday tangible joys of existing.
Okay, so focusing on the day-to-day.
Right. In a climate where overt political critique is silenced, celebrating life loudly, focusing on a deeply sophisticated chorus, and getting a room full of people to dance together, that becomes a profound survival mechanism.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
You are basically asserting your humanity and your cultural vitality when the state wants you quiet and compliant.
So, like, the resilience is baked right into the bass line. I absolutely love that.
It really is.
So if this pressure cooker environment forced this musical evolution, who actually sparked the sound? the source gives us what it calls the Mount Rushmore of Brazilian boogie.
Yes, the four key pioneers.
Right. And if we were talking about the foundation, I mean, we have to start with the sheer blunt force of Tim Maia.
Oh man, Tim Maia is a colossal figure. He's essentially the undisputed heavyweight champion of Brazilian soul and funk.
The heavyweight champion, yeah.
What really catalyzed his sound was the time he spent living in the United States in the late 1950s and early 60s. He absorbed the raw energy of American soul and R&B firsthand.
So he was right there in the mix.
Exactly. When he eventually returned to Brazil, he brought that unapologetic heavy funk sound back with him, and he just smashed it right into the middle of the MPB scene.
But this is where Maya's story takes a deeply weird turn. And I have to admit, I am completely fascinated by this contradiction.
Oh, you mean the rational phase?
Yes. The column highlights his 1975 album, Rational. It's considered this masterpiece of funk and disco. But it's fundamentally an album about his devotion to a UFO-obsessed rationalist cult.
Yeah, it's pretty out there.
How do you even put theology on the dance floor? Like, how does a religious disco album work?
Well, it is one of the most bizarre and brilliant cultural artifacts of the decade.
Oh.
Tim Maia had joined the cultural rational movement, and he was absolutely devout for a brief period.
Okay.
But instead of making quiet, meditative, spiritual music, he used the tightest, most infectious, driving funk arrangements imaginable to preach the cult's cosmology.
That is amazing.
The horns are blazing, the bass is incredibly heavy, and he's just belting out lyrics about achieving cosmic energy.
So it's literally a religious disco record.
Precisely. And it works because the groove is so undeniable. The musicianship completely transcended the esoteric lyrics.
Right. Like the music was just too good to ignore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't care at all about rational energy, you simply couldn't stop yourself from dancing to it.
Okay, so if Tim Maia was the blunt force trauma of funk, hitting you over the head with this massive sound, the scene needed someone to refine it, right?
Definitely.
Someone to take that raw energy and make it sophisticated. And that brings us to the second face on our Mount Rushmore Cassiano.
Ah, Cassiano. He is the absolute master of the mellow groove. The source highlights his 1973 album, Realcy, and I mean, the arrangements here are just staggering in their complexity.
Staggering? How?
Well, Tim Maia wanted you to sweat, right?
Yeah.
Cassiano wanted you to float.
Okay, I like that. The column gets really specific here about his instrumentation, particularly the electric piano and the guitar. What was he doing that was so revolutionary?
It was his mastery of counter melody. In a standard funk track, the rhythm section often locks into one unified groove.
Right, everyone playing together.
But Cassiano would have his electric piano and his guitar playing completely different melodic lines that intricately danced around each other.
Like they were deliberately dodging each other in the mix.
Exactly. They filled in each other's gaps. It created a groove out of the empty space.
Wow.
It was incredibly dense and complex if you tried to transcribe the sheet music, but to the listener's ear, it just sounded effortless and smooth.
So it feels simple, but it's actually super mathematical.
Yeah, and that specific interplay became the absolute blueprint for the rare groove sound that DJs would obsess over later.
So Cassiano is weaving these beautiful sonic tapestries. But it's one thing to weave melodies on traditional guitars and pianos. It's another thing to introduce entirely foreign, high-tech sounds into the mix.
Right, the electronic element.
And that's where our third pioneer, Hilden, enters the picture. The source notes his 1975 debut, Na Rua, Na Chuva, Na Fazenda, and specifically points out his heavy use of synthesizers.
Yes, and to understand why that matters, we have to look back at the political reality of 1970s Brazil that we talked about. Under the military government, there were incredibly strict import bans. The regime wanted to stimulate domestic manufacturing.
So they didn't want foreign goods coming in.
Right. So bringing in foreign electronic equipment like a Moog synthesizer or a string machine was prohibitively expensive and logistically nightmare-inducing.
Oh, wow. So just having a synthesizer in your studio wasn't just an artistic choice. It was an absolute flex.
Oh, massive.
Like it was a completely alien sound dropping into a traditional Brazilian studio.
Precisely. And Hilden utilized those synths brilliantly. He took the melodic heart of MPB and injected it with this highly rhythmic, club-ready electronic pulse.
Making it hit harder.
Yeah, it was urban, it was modern, and it served as the perfect bridge between traditional Brazilian melodic sensibilities and the pure physical energy of an American dance floor. He made the sound massive.
Which perfectly sets up our final pioneer.
Yeah.
Because while Hilden was looking outward at American synth technology, Carlos da Fé was looking deeply inward at Brazil's oldest roots.
Yes, a totally different approach.
The column points to his 1980 work, Brazil Afro Samba. Help me out here. What exactly is Afro Samba, and how on earth does it blend with boogie?
Afro samba is a deeply rich subgenre that originated in the 1960s. It takes the sophisticated acoustic guitar playing of bossa nova and merges it with the heavy, polyrhythmic percussion and spiritual chants of candomblé, which is an Afro-Brazilian religion.
Okay, so it's very acoustic, very earthy, and deeply rooted in African rhythms.
Exactly. It's essentially sacred acoustic folk music.
Right.
And what Carlos Tafe did was take those profound ancestral polyrhythms and orchestrate them with the electric bass, the brass sections, and the driving tempo of funk.
That sounds incredible.
It was pivotal because it proved that Brazilian boogie didn't just have to mimic American soul, it could completely modernize and elevate Brazil's own deep cultural heritage.
Okay, so we have the architects. We have Maia's soulful power, Cassiano's intricate weaving, Hilden's futuristic synths, and Dafe's deep roots.
The Mount Rushmore.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. What actually happens under the hood of these tracks?
Oh, let's get into the DNA.
Yeah, like if I am a DJ, how do I know I am listening to a Brazilian boogie rare groove? The MMR source actually deconstructs the musical DNA, and I want to break down why these specific elements force us to dance.
Well, it starts with the foundation, a driving 44 beat, heavily accented with syncopated funk rhythms. That is the engine.
The engine.
But
Yeah.
layered immediately on top of that is the bass line. And in Brazilian boogie, the bass isn't just a rhythmic anchor keeping time. It is deeply, aggressively melodic.
Right. Normally, a bass line is just the heartbeat. It sits in the background and dictates the tempo. But here, the bass is basically singing its own song.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost competing with the lead vocalist for your attention.
Yeah.
And when you combine that wandering, singing bass line with the chords they were using, I mean, the column mentions these complex jazz and MPB chord progressions.
Right.
Why does that matter to someone on a dance floor?
What's fascinating here is the psychological tension it creates. Jazz chords are inherently complex, right? They contain dissonant notes that usually make people want to sit down in a dark club, sip a drink, and stroke their chins.
Right, they are very intellectual.
But when you smuggle those highly intellectual jazz voicings over a driving, physical 44 drum beat and a singing bass line, you create this incredible tension.
Because your brain and your body are reacting differently.
Yes. Your brain is being stimulated by the complex harmony, but your body is being compelled by the rhythm.
It's hiding the medicine in the candy. You think you're just turning off your brain and dancing to a disco track, but you're actually absorbing high-level jazz theory without even realizing it.
Precisely. And layered over all of that, you have the lush vocal harmonies and the electric pianos. But there's one more crucial element the column emphasizes that we have to discuss, and that is the analog warmth of the recordings.
Yes, and this is where I really want to push you, because I hear this phrase, analog warmth, thrown around by audiophiles all the time.
Oh, constantly.
We live in a world where modern producers have infinite digital tools. They have massive software libraries. Why are they deliberately hunting down 50-year-old vinyl? What does a physical tape machine do to the sound that my modern laptop can't?
It comes down to physical limitations and the nature of magnetic tape. When you record onto analog tape and you push the volume slightly into the red, the tape cannot perfectly handle the signal.
Okay, so it distorts.
Well, it naturally compresses the audio. It shaves off the harsh, brittle, high-frequency digital edges, and it physically glues the instruments together.
Oh, wow. So the imperfection is actually the feature.
Exactly. When you drop the needle on a 1975 Cassiano record, you aren't just hearing mathematical code translated into sound. You are hearing the physical air moving in a studio in Rio de Janeiro 50 years ago.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
You hear the slight drift of the drummer's tempo, because he isn't a quantized drum machine. You feel the electricity humming in the guitar amp.
It's alive.
It is a deeply physical, tangible texture that a digital plugin can mimic, but can never truly possess natively.
And that tangible texture is exactly what sparked the next massive chapter in this story. We know how it was made in the 70s, but how did it end up in that underground London club in 1998 that we talked about at the start of the deep dive?
Ah, yeah, that journey. It all comes down to the overseas crate diggers in the 1990s. The MMR column maps out this incredible timeline.
Right.
You had obsessive record collectors, primarily concentrated in the UK and Japan, whose entire lives revolved around hunting down forgotten, obscure vinyl.
And these Brazilian boogie records were the ultimate prize because of the scarcity principle, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they were pressed in Brazil for a domestic audience during a time when international export wasn't a priority.
Exactly. A record like Reels wasn't being shipped to record stores in London or Tokyo in 1973.
Right, there's no global distribution for this stuff.
So 20 years later, these collectors were flying to São Paulo, digging through dusty thrift stores and basements, and paying absolutely exorbitant prices to bring these original pressings back home.
But they didn't just hoard them in their living rooms. They gave them to club DJs. And the column details how these DJs stripped these tracks out of their original context and started dropping them into new disco and deep disco sets.
And we should probably clarify for the listener what new disco was doing at that time.
Good point.
It was a movement that took the organic, lush sounds of 1970s disco and blended them with modern electronic club production, usually beefing up the kick drum and the bass so it would hit harder on modern club speakers.
So imagine the shock of a club goer in 1998. You are used to synthesized electronic dance music, and suddenly the DJ seamlessly beat matches this warm, analog, incredibly complex Portuguese track right into the set.
Yeah, it provided a totally different organic texture that kept the dance floor moving but completely elevated the mood.
It blew people's minds. But as influential as that 90s crate digger scene was, it was still incredibly exclusive.
Very niche.
Yeah, you had to be lucky enough to be in that specific club, or rich enough to buy the imported vinyl. What truly universalized the sound is what happened next to the transition into the modern streaming era from the 2010s to today.
Right. The transition from the dusty crate to the digital cloud. The source notes that a massive wave of global reissues, digital distribution, and streaming completely democratized the genre.
And the accessibility changed everything, didn't it?
It really did. Suddenly, an entire generation of young producers around the world had instant access to the entire catalogs of Hilden, Tim Maia, and Carlos da Fe.
And they started chopping it up.
Oh yeah, big time.
The column points out that this Brazilian boogie sound is now a foundational pillar for modern internet-born genres. Like if you, the listener, are studying right now to a lo-fi hip-hop playlist on YouTube, pause it for a second and just listen to the instrumentation.
It's a great exercise.
That mellow electric piano loop, that slightly muffled melodic bass line. You are very likely listening to a chopped-up piece of 1970s Brazilian boogie.
It has deeply infiltrated the global subconscious. Modern producers use these samples specifically to inject that missing analog warmth and humanity into highly sequenced digital tracks.
It grounds the digital music in something real.
Furthermore, the source notes that original tracks are now heavily licensed for movies, television dramas, and commercial advertising globally.
It really is everywhere. A sound forged in a specific political pressure cooker has become the universal soundtrack for chilling out, studying, and dancing all over the world.
It's an incredible legacy.
So what does this all mean? Let's wrap up our core takeaways from the MMR column. Brazilian boogie and MPB rare groove are absolutely not museum pieces.
No, not at all.
Their intensely sophisticated musicality, their focus on the tangible joys of urban life, and that undeniable analog warmth provide a vital living inspiration for modern culture. For you, the listener, this music offers a deeply human, organic antidote to the hyper-processed, sterile audio landscape we often find ourselves in today. It's the sound of real people in a real room, refusing to be quiet and finding joy in the groove, despite the heavy pressures of the world outside their studio doors.
It is a profound testament to the endurance of brilliant, resilient art. But, looking at this massive trajectory from the heavily censored studios of the 70s to the fiercely guarded vinyl crates of the 90s, and finally to the infinite digital streaming era of the 2020s, this raises an important question.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment. What is the question?
Well, think about the journey of the listener. Decades ago, finding an original copy of Cassiano's Reals required years of dedication. You had to physically travel, search through dusty record bins in Tokyo or London, and pay massive sums of money.
It was a real quest.
Uncovering that sound was a hard-earned treasure. The friction of finding it created a deep personal mystique. Today, thanks to algorithms and global streaming, you can summon that exact same rare groove instantly on your phone while standing in line for coffee.
Total frictionless access.
Exactly. So the question for you to ponder is, does having infinite frictionless access to these formerly rare cultural artifacts diminish their magic and erase the mystique that made them so highly valued in the first place?
That's a tough one.
Or does this digital globalization finally fulfill the 1970s artist's original dream bypassing borders, bypassing censorship, and universally connecting the whole world through their groove.
That is a phenomenal thought to leave on because the pressure cooker that forged this music was ultimately about escaping into a shared, joyous experience.
Yeah, precisely.
And now that shared experience is quite literally sitting in your pocket. The historical map might not be a clean, straight line, but the DNA of that 1970s Brazilian groove is beating right there inside your modern playlist, just waiting for you to hit play.